My name is Ruth, and I am 58 years old, a retired school teacher from Boston. After 32 years of marriage to Thomas, a successful businessman, our union ended 5 years ago. Though we divorced, I never expected to be sitting quietly at his will reading, watching my son Jackson smirk alongside his wife Amanda. The tension in that attorney's office was suffocating. They were so certain I would get nothing from Thomas's $45 million estate. Then came that letter and final video that changed everything. Before I tell you what happened at that will reading, I would love to know where you are watching from. Take a second to drop your location in the comments, hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that might just surprise you. I met Thomas during my sophomore year at Boston University. He was studying business while I pursued education. We were complete opposites in many ways. I was outgoing and loved literature and arts, while Thomas was reserved and fascinated by numbers and strategy. Perhaps that's why we balanced each other so perfectly. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant near campus. I remember being impressed that Thomas had saved up to take me somewhere nice despite being a scholarship student with limited means. He had ambition burning in his eyes, even then telling me about his dreams to start his own financial consulting business. I believed in him from that first night. We married 2 years after graduation. The ceremony was small but beautiful, with just close family and friends. Thomas had already started working for a local investment firm, putting in long hours to learn the business from the ground up. I secured a position teaching English at a local high school. Our early years were financially tight but emotionally rich. We lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, saving every penny toward Thomas's dream of launching his own company. At night, we would sit at our second-hand kitchen table, Thomas working on business plans while I graded papers. We were partners in every sense, building our future together brick by brick. When Thomas finally took the leap to start his own financial advisory firm in our 5th year of marriage, I picked up extra summer school teaching to help cover expenses. Those first 2 years of his business were incredibly stressful. There were moments when I found Thomas awake at 3 in the morning, worrying whether he had made a mistake. I never doubted him, though. I made sure he knew that. The turning point came when Thomas secured his first major client, a local real estate developer looking for investment guidance. Thomas's careful strategy helped the developer triple his return on a risky venture. Word spread, and suddenly Thomas financial advisors began attracting serious clients. By our 10th anniversary, we had moved into a beautiful colonial house in a prestigious Boston suburb. Thomas had 15 employees and was managing millions in investments. His business philosophy of conservative growth combined with strategic risk-taking proved remarkably successful, especially during market downturns when his clients retained wealth while others lost heavily. Our son Jackson was born after 8 years of marriage. The pregnancy had been difficult to achieve, and we had nearly given up hope of having a child. Jackson felt like our miracle. I can still picture Thomas holding him for the first time, tears streaming down his usually composed face, whispering promises to give his son everything he himself never had growing up. I took 3 years away from teaching to stay home with Jackson. Thomas could certainly afford it by then, but I missed the classroom and eventually returned part-time. As Thomas's business grew, exponentially, my role evolved too. I became the hostess for client dinners, charity galas, and networking events that were crucial to Thomas's business development. I managed our household-raised Jackson and created the stable family life that allowed Thomas to focus on building his empire. Jackson was a sweet child initially. He had Thomas's analytical mind, but I hoped some of my empathy too. As he grew older, though, I noticed concerning changes. The affluent environment was affecting him. While Thomas and I had built our success from nothing, Jackson was born into privilege. By his teenage years, he had developed an unsettling sense of entitlement. I tried to instill better values. I brought Jackson to volunteer at homeless shelters and encouraged him to work summer jobs rather than just receive an allowance. Thomas, however, often undermined these efforts, perhaps compensating for his own difficult childhood or his frequent absences due to work. He showered Jackson with expensive gifts, paid for luxury vacations with friends, and never enforced consequences for poor behavior. When Jackson turned 18, Thomas bought him a brand new luxury car. I argued that this was excessive for a new driver, but Thomas insisted that Jackson deserved the best. This pattern continued through college. where Jackson changed majors 3 times, took 6 years to graduate, and never held a job. Thomas covered all expenses without question. Meanwhile, our marriage was showing serious strain. Thomas had become a workaholic, regularly missing family events and anniversaries. We lived increasingly separate lives. I focused on my teaching career, my charity work, and maintaining connections with friends. Thomas focused on growing his now substantial business empire, which had expanded to include real estate holdings and technology investments. By the time Jackson graduated college, our marriage was essentially a partnership in name only. I suggested counseling multiple times, but Thomas always claimed he was too busy. When I finally insisted, we attended 3 sessions before Thomas stopped going, saying it was a waste of valuable time. I filed for divorce after 32 years of marriage. It wasn't an angry decision, just a sad acknowledgement that we had grown apart beyond reconciliation. Thomas seemed almost relieved, quickly agreeing to my terms. Despite being entitled to a substantial portion of our shared wealth, I only asked for our family home, a reasonable monthly support, and some retirement funds. I wanted to maintain peace, not battle over money that had never been my primary concern anyway. The divorce was finalized 5 years ago, relatively amicable as these things go. Thomas and I maintained a cordial relationship afterward, even meeting monthly for coffee to catch up. We had shared too much history to become complete strangers. Jackson, however, was furious about the divorce. Despite being 28 at the time, and old enough to understand the complexities of marriage, he placed all blame squarely on me. In his mind, I had abandoned his father after Thomas had provided a luxurious life for me. No amount of explaining could convince him that the decision had been mutual or that I had taken far less than my legal entitlement in the settlement. Jackson met Amanda 3 years ago at a charity gala Thomas had sponsored. She was working for the event planning company, a beautiful and charismatic woman 10 years Jackson's junior. From their first introduction, I had concerns. The way her eyes calculated the value of everything in the room, the way she subtly directed conversations toward wealth and status, the carefully crafted comments about admiring successful families while looking pointedly at Thomas. Within 6 months, Jackson and Amanda were engaged. Thomas paid for an extravagant wedding at a coastal estate with 400 guests, many of whom Jackson and Amanda barely knew. I sat in the front row, as mother of the groom, smiling politely while feeling increasingly disconnected from my son's life. After the wedding, Jackson and Amanda moved into a luxury condo purchased by Thomas as their wedding gift. Jackson joined his father's business despite having no relevant experience or apparent interest in finance. Thomas created a special executive position for him with a generous salary and minimal responsibilities. Thomas's health began declining about a year ago. The diagnosis was pancreatic cancer, already advanced when discovered. Despite our divorce, I was devastated. When I heard the news, I immediately called Thomas and offered any support he needed. To Jackson and Amanda's visible annoyance, Thomas accepted. During his final months, I visited Thomas regularly at the hospital. We reminisced about our earlier years together and the good times we had shared. Thomas apologized for letting his work consume him and for the ways he had failed our family. There was a peaceful reconciliation between us, not romantic but deeply meaningful. Thomas passed away 3 weeks ago, surrounded by machines in his private hospital room. I was there the day before, holding his hand and reading him poetry he had once enjoyed during our courtship. Jackson and Amanda arrived after I had been there for an hour, making it clear with their body language that they felt I was intruding. I left to give them privacy, not knowing it would be my last time seeing Thomas alive. He died early the next morning. The nurse told me he went peacefully in his sleep. The months leading up to Thomas's death were increasingly difficult for me, not just because of watching his decline, but because of the growing hostility from Jackson and Amanda. What had started as subtle coldness after their wedding evolved into overt exclusion and occasional cruelty. Jackson began declining my invitations for lunch or dinner, always with vague excuses about work commitments. When I would suggest alternative dates, he would take days to respond, if at all. Our conversations, once filled with genuine sharing, became superficial and brief. He rarely asked about my life or well-being. Amanda was the architect of much of this distance, though Jackson was a willing participant. She began planning family events without informing me until the last minute, often scheduling them when she knew I had standing commitments. If I managed to attend, I would find myself seated far from Jackson, surrounded by Amanda's friends or family, rather than my own son. The comments began subtly. "Oh, Ruth, that dress is so practical," Amanda would say, at a formal gathering, emphasizing my teacher's salary lifestyle compared to their luxury. Or, "Jackson and Thomas were just discussing the new portfolio strategy. Business talk, you wouldn't find it interesting," effectively dismissing me from conversations in my own family. I particularly remember Thomas's 65th birthday celebration last year. Amanda had organized an elaborate party at an exclusive restaurant. When I arrived, I discovered everyone was dressed in formal attire, though the invitation I received had specified casual. Amanda feigned surprise. "Oh, didn't you get the update I sent everyone else did?" I spent the evening feeling conspicuously underdressed, catching pitying glances from other guests. During that same party, I overheard Amanda telling one of Thomas's business associates, Ruth and Thomas just had different priorities. She chose her students over supporting his career. Men need partners who put them first, don't you think? The deliberate mischaracterization of my 32-year supportive marriage stung deeply. Jackson, who once would have defended me, simply stood by, occasionally nodding in agreement with Amanda's subtle jabs. When I tried to speak with him privately about how I was feeling, he accused me of being oversensitive and trying to make everything about you as usual. Amanda systematically convinced Jackson that I had never truly supported Thomas, that I had taken advantage of his generosity, and that the divorce was entirely my selfish decision. Despite the facts contradicting this narrative, Jackson seemed eager to accept it. Perhaps it was easier than acknowledging the complexities of his parents' relationship. The worst incident occurred at Christmas 2 years ago. I had always hosted our family Christmas Eve dinner, a tradition that continued even after the divorce, with Thomas attending amicably. That year, however, I received a text message from Jackson 3 days before Christmas. "Amanda and I are hosting Christmas Eve this year. Dad thinks it's better this way, too." When I called Thomas to confirm, he seemed confused, saying Amanda had told him I wanted to take a break from hosting duties. The deliberate manipulation was clear, but Thomas was already beginning to show signs of the illness that would later be diagnosed as cancer, and I chose not to create additional stress for him. I arrived at their home on Christmas Eve with carefully selected gifts and my traditional homemade gingerbread. Amanda greeted me with artificial cheer and directed me to the kitchen to deposit my contribution, while other guests were welcomed into the living room with champagne. My gifts for Jackson were placed at the back of the tree, and when it came time for gift exchange, they were accidentally overlooked until I mentioned them. Throughout Thomas's illness, these dynamics worsened. Amanda began suggesting to hospital staff that my visits upset Thomas and attempted to restrict my visiting hours. The head nurse, Mrs. Sullivan, seeing through this, quietly assured me I was welcome anytime, and noticed how Thomas's vital signs actually improved during my visits. I learned from one of Thomas's longtime assistants that Jackson and Amanda had been inquiring about the details of his will for months before his death, meeting privately with Thomas when he was heavily medicated. The assistant, Patricia, had worked with Thomas for 20 years and was concerned enough to mention it to me, breaking her usual professional reserve. Thomas witnessed some of this behavior himself. Once, while I was visiting him in the hospital, Jackson and Amanda arrived unexpectedly, not realizing Thomas was awake. Behind his partially closed eyes, Amanda whispered to Jackson, "Let's come back later when she's gone. No need to pretend we want her here." Thomas's heart monitor beeped faster, and he squeezed my hand tightly, though he didn't open his eyes or acknowledge hearing them. Through all this, I maintained my dignity. I had a small but solid support network of friends who kept me grounded. My best friend Diane, who had known Thomas and me since college, regularly reminded me that Jackson's behavior reflected his own insecurities, not my worth as a mother. My younger sister Lauren offered her guest room as a sanctuary whenever family tensions became overwhelming. I threw myself into volunteer work, finding purpose in helping at a women's shelter and teaching literacy classes to adult learners. The gratitude of my students provided validation that my family no longer offered. One student, a grandmother learning to read so she could enjoy books with her grandchildren, told me, "You have such patience and kindness, Ruth. Your family must be so proud." The irony brought tears to my eyes that I quickly blinked away. Thomas's funeral was a large formal affair, organized entirely by Jackson and Amanda without my input. When I arrived, I discovered they had arranged for family seating at the front, but somehow this didn't include me. I was directed to the fourth row behind business associates who had known Thomas for far less time than our 37-year relationship. During the reception afterward, I overheard Jackson and Amanda in an alcove discussing the upcoming will reading. "Dad made sure you'll get everything," Amanda was saying. "He knew who really cared about him in the end." Jackson replied, "Mom's going to be shocked when she gets nothing. Maybe then she'll finally disappear from our lives for good?" I walked away silently, heart heavy, but resolve strengthening. Despite their clear desire to exclude me, I decided I would attend the will reading. Not for money, which I had never prioritized, but to honor the final wishes of the man who had been my partner for most of my adult life, whatever those wishes might be. The will reading was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after the funeral. I woke early that day, my stomach in knots. The weather matched my mood, gray and drizzling, as I prepared myself both physically and emotionally for what would likely be another painful family encounter. I chose my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that was respectful but not somber, paired with the pearl necklace Thomas had given me on our 20th anniversary. These pearls had remained one of my few indulgences from my married life, a reminder of happier times. I applied minimal makeup, just enough to ensure I looked put together. The face in the mirror looked tired but dignified. The attorney's office was located in a historic building in downtown Boston, all polished brass and rich mahogany. Thomas had worked with the law firm of Fitzgerald Kennedy and Associates for decades. I had met Mr. Fitzgerald, the senior partner, at various business functions over the years, and always found him to be professionally warm but appropriately reserved. I arrived 15 minutes early, preferring to be settled before Jackson and Amanda made their entrance. The receptionist, recognizing me, smiled sympathetically and offered coffee, which I accepted gratefully. The warm cup gave my hands something to hold a small comfort against the anxiety building in my chest. At precisely 5 minutes to 10, the elevator doors opened, revealing Jackson and Amanda. My son looked like a stranger in an expensive tailored suit, his face set in harsh lines I didn't recognize. Amanda was impeccably styled in a designer black dress that somehow managed to be both funeral appropriate and fashionable. Her face betrayed a flash of annoyance upon seeing me already seated in the waiting area. Jackson barely acknowledged my presence with a curt nod. Amanda didn't bother with even that pretense of civility, immediately engaging the receptionist in conversation while pointedly keeping her back to me. The message was clear. I was an unwelcome intruder in their moment of anticipated windfall. Several other attendees began arriving, including Patricia Thomas's longtime executive assistant, 2 of his business partners, and his younger brother Robert, who lived in California and with whom Thomas had maintained a distant but cordial relationship. Robert at least greeted me warmly with a hug and sat beside me, providing a buffer between me and the cold energy emanating from my son and his wife. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mr. Fitzgerald emerged from his office to escort us to the conference room. As we walked the short hallway, Jackson managed to position himself directly behind me. "Don't expect anything," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Dad knew who really cared about him. I kept my eyes forward, maintaining my composure, though his words cut deeply. We entered a large conference room dominated by a gleaming table. Nameplates had been positioned at each seat, and I noted with some surprise that mine was placed near the head of the table, directly across from Mr. Fitzgerald's position. Jackson and Amanda were seated further down. Amanda leaned over to whisper something to Jackson, both of them glancing my way with barely concealed smirks. I caught fragments of their conversation, waste of time, and she'll see. They were already discussing renovation plans for Thomas's main residence and which of his vehicles Jackson would claim. Mr. Fitzgerald called the meeting to order with a gentle clearing of his throat. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He began by expressing condolences to all present and explaining that the proceedings would follow Thomas's explicit instructions. "Before we begin the formal reading," Mr. Fitzgerald said, his eyes scanning the room, "I want to emphasize that Thomas was very specific about how today should proceed. I would ask that everyone hold their questions and comments until I have completed the reading in its entirety." I noticed a sealed envelope on the table in front of him, with my name written on it in Thomas's distinctive handwriting. Mr. Fitzgerald saw me looking at it and gave an almost imperceptible nod as if confirming it was indeed meant for me. My curiosity was piqued, but I maintained my composed exterior. As Mr. Fitzgerald organized his papers, my mind drifted to my last coherent conversation with Thomas in the hospital. He had been having a relatively good day, the pain medication balanced enough to keep him comfortable without completely clouding his mind. We had been reminiscing about a trip to Maine we had taken when Jackson was 10, how we had collected seashells and built elaborate sandcastles. As I was preparing to leave, Thomas had gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Ruth," he had whispered, "there are things I need to say." But then a nurse had entered to check his vitals, and the moment passed. By my next visit, he had declined, significantly drifting in and out of consciousness. I had assumed I would never know what he had wanted to tell me. Jackson's impatient voice brought me back to the present. "Can we move this along? Some of us have businesses to run," he said, the irony of his minimal work ethic apparently lost on him. Amanda nodded in agreement, checking her expensive watch with exaggerated concern. Mr. Fitzgerald remained unruffled. "As I was saying, we will proceed according to Thomas's wishes." He lifted a thick document that I recognized as Thomas's will. "I'll begin with the standard legal declarations, and then move to the distributions." The room fell silent as Mr. Fitzgerald began reading through the formal legal language establishing the will's validity. Jackson fidgeted in his seat while Amanda scrolled through her phone under the table, neither bothering to pay attention to anything that didn't directly relate to their inheritance. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, mentally preparing myself for whatever was to come. I truly expected nothing substantial, having already received what I considered a fair settlement in our divorce. I was present out of respect for Thomas and the life we had shared, nothing more. Mr. Fitzgerald finally reached the distribution section. "To my loyal household staff, I leave the sum of $100,000 each to be distributed as follows." He listed the 5 longtime employees who had maintained Thomas's residence over the years. Next came several bequests to charitable organizations' causes Thomas had supported throughout his career. Education funds for employees' children followed a gesture characteristic of Thomas's belief in the transformative power of education. "To my brother Robert, I leave my collection of vintage watches and the vacation property in Nantucket, along with the sum of $2 million. Robert nodded solemnly beside me. The brothers had never been particularly close, but Thomas had always ensured his younger brother was financially secure. "To my executive assistant, Patricia, for her 20 years of loyal service, I leave the sum of $1 million and my collection of first edition books which she always admired." Patricia, dignified as always, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Jackson was becoming visibly impatient, leaning forward in his seat. Amanda had abandoned all pretense of phone interest and was now fully focused on Mr. Fitzgerald, her eyes calculating as each bequest reduced the remaining estate. "To my son Jackson," Mr. Fitzgerald continued, causing Jackson to straighten in anticipation, "I leave my Manhattan apartment, the summer house in the Hamptons, and my collection of vehicles." Jackson smiled triumphantly, catching my eye with a smug expression. Amanda squeezed his arm in excitement, but Mr. Fitzgerald hadn't finished. "However," he continued, causing Jackson's smile to falter. "Before addressing the remainder of the estate, Thomas has requested that a video message be played for all present." Jackson's expression changed to confusion. "A video? What video?" "This isn't standard procedure." Mr. Fitzgerald looked at Jackson over his glasses. "Your father was very specific about this requirement, Jackson. The video must be viewed before I can continue with the reading of the will." Amanda leaned over to whisper urgently in Jackson's ear, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. I could see concern replacing their previous confidence. They had clearly not anticipated this development. A younger associate wheeled in a television and set up a laptop computer. The lights were dim slightly, and Mr. Fitzgerald inserted a USB drive into the laptop. After a moment, Thomas's face appeared on the screen. The sight of him, healthy, recorded perhaps 6 months ago, before the cancer had taken its full toll, brought tears to my eyes. He sat in his home office, the bookshelves I had helped arrange years ago visible behind him. He wore a light blue shirt that I had always said brought out his eyes. "If you're watching this," Thomas began, his voice strong and clear, "then I have passed away, and you are gathered for the reading of my will. I have asked Jeffrey to play this before revealing the main distributions because I want my reasoning to be clear. Thomas paused, taking a sip of water. During my life, I achieved significant financial success. I built a business that thrived and accumulated wealth beyond what I could have imagined as a young man from humble beginnings. But in my final months facing my mortality, I have come to realize that success in business does not automatically translate to success in life. The room was completely silent now. Even Jackson and Amanda were transfixed by the screen. In particular, I have been reflecting on what it means to leave a legacy. Not just financial assets, but values, character, and the impact we have on those around us. Thomas's eyes seemed to be looking directly at Jackson as he spoke. Money is a tool, not a measure of worth. How we treat others, especially in difficult times, reveals far more about us than the balance in our bank accounts. Thomas shifted in his chair, leaning forward slightly. What you don't know is that during my final year, I have been watching and learning. As my health declined, I had the unusual opportunity to observe how different people in my life responded not just to my illness, but to each other. I felt a chill run through me. What exactly had Thomas observed? I hired private investigators. Thomas continued, causing gasps around the table, not out of suspicion initially, but out of curiosity. I wanted to understand the dynamics of my family when I wasn't present. What I discovered was both enlightening and deeply disappointing. The camera zoomed in slightly on Thomas's face, his expression grave. Jackson, my son, I have watched you systematically exclude your mother from family events, speak disrespectfully about her to others, and allow your wife to treat her with contempt. The woman who devoted 32 years to our family, who raised you with love and sacrifice, who took less than her legal entitlement in our divorce to maintain peace. Jackson's face had drained of color. Amanda sat frozen beside him. I saw evidence of how you both planned to use my illness to ensure Ruth received nothing more from me, how you manipulated visiting schedules at the hospital, how you spoke about her when you thought I was unconscious. Thomas's voice remained steady, but his disappointment was palpable. This behavior reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the values I hope to instill in you. Thomas took another sip of water before continuing. Ruth, on the other hand, visited me regularly throughout my illness, reading to me, bringing homemade food when I could still eat it, sitting quietly with me during my worst days. She never once mentioned inheritance or finances. Her care was genuine, expecting nothing in return. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks, but made no move to wipe them away. Thomas's words were healing wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged. What few people know, Thomas continued, is that after our divorce, Ruth and I rebuilt a friendship, meeting monthly for coffee, sharing news of our lives, supporting each other as friends rather than spouses. I came to deeply regret allowing my work to take precedence over our marriage for so many years. Thomas's expression softened. Ruth, I want to publicly apologize for the years I took you for granted, for the important moments I missed, for failing to protect you from the unkindness you've experienced from our son and his wife. You deserve better. Amanda started to rise from her seat, but Mr. Fitzgerald held up a hand, signaling that everyone was required to remain for the duration of the video. She sank back down, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Additionally, Thomas said, his tone changing, my investigators documented numerous instances of Amanda discussing with friends how she planned to spend my money after my death, making disparaging remarks about both Ruth and myself, and even evidence of infidelity that Jackson seems unaware of. At this, Jackson turned to stare at Amanda, who was now visibly pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. There are photographs, text messages, and recorded conversations in a file that Mr. Fitzgerald will provide to Jackson privately after this meeting, Thomas continued. I take no pleasure in delivering this news, but I believe in truth, especially when it impacts the distribution of my estate. Thomas straightened in his chair, his businessman demeanor returning. During my final months, I have substantially revised my will. I did so with full mental capacity, verified by 2 independent psychiatric evaluations with witnesses present who had no stake in my estate. My decisions are legally sound and reflect my true wishes. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze intense. Jackson, you have been my greatest joy and my deepest disappointment. I have watched you become someone motivated primarily by material gain rather than character. I bear much responsibility for this, having indulged your every whim and failed to teach you the value of earned success." Thomas sighed deeply. "I still love you, son, and I believe you can become a better man. But I would be doing you no favors by reinforcing the values you currently display with an unrestricted inheritance." His expression softened again as he seemed to look at me through the screen. "Ruth has demonstrated integrity, compassion, and dignity through extremely difficult circumstances. She never once asked about inheritance or financial support beyond our divorce agreement. While everyone else was calculating their share of my estate, she was simply present, caring for me as a person, not a portfolio." Thomas's final words were measured and clear. "True wealth is in how we treat others, especially when we think there is nothing to gain. I have made my decisions accordingly. Thank you for your attention." The screen went black, leaving the room in stunned silence. Mr. Fitzgerald calmly turned the lights back up and returned to his position at the head of the table. He took a moment to organize his papers, allowing everyone to process what they had just witnessed. Jackson sat motionless, staring at the now blank screen. Amanda's carefully cultivated poise had completely disintegrated, her eyes darting between Jackson and Mr. Fitzgerald, calculating damage control. "Shall I continue with the reading?" Mr. Fitzgerald asked quietly, receiving silent nods from around the table. The atmosphere in the conference room had transformed completely. The confidence that had radiated from Jackson and Amanda earlier had evaporated, replaced by a tense, brittle silence. I sat still, processing Thomas's unexpected words, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. Mr. Fitzgerald adjusted his glasses and continued as if the extraordinary video had been a routine part of the proceedings. "Now, regarding the remainder of the estate, which includes Thomas's primary residence, his business holdings, investment portfolios, and liquid assets totaling approximately $41 million after the previously mentioned bequests." He paused, glancing around the room before his eyes settled on Jackson. "To my son Jackson, I leave 10% of my remaining estate valued at approximately $4.1 million. Jackson's head snapped up, his face contorting in shock and outrage. 10%? That can't be right. There must be a mistake." Mr. Fitzgerald continued calmly. "This inheritance comes with conditions. The funds will be placed in a trust managed by Fitzgerald Kennedy and Associates. Jackson will receive a monthly allowance of $15,000 with additional funds released for approved business investments or education purposes. Jackson must also attend financial management counseling and demonstrate responsible fiscal behavior for a minimum of 5 years before the restrictions may be reconsidered." Amanda's face had gone from pale to flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. We're talking about his only son. We'll contest this immediately." Mr. Fitzgerald acknowledged her comment with a slight nod, but continued reading. "As for Amanda Williams Porter, my daughter-in-law, in accordance with the prenuptial agreement she signed upon marrying my son, she is entitled only to what is explicitly granted to her in this will." He paused again, looking directly at Amanda. "I leave her the sum of $1 symbolic of my awareness of her true character and motivations regarding my family and fortune." Amanda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is outrageous. You can't do this." "Jackson, say something." Jackson seemed stunned into silence, still processing the drastic reduction in his expected inheritance and the revelations about his wife. Mr. Fitzgerald waited patiently for the outburst to subside before continuing. "Now," he said, reaching for the envelope with my name on it, "regarding Ruth Porter." He slid the envelope across the table to me. "Thomas asked that you read this privately first, Ruth, before I continue." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The familiar handwriting brought a fresh wave of emotion. "My dear Ruth," it began, "by the time you read this, I will be gone. There is so much I wish I had said to you over the years, so many moments I wish I could reclaim. Our divorce was as much a reflection of my failures as anything else. I buried myself in work, mistaking financial provision for true partnership. It took losing you to recognize what I'd taken for granted. During my illness, you showed me what unconditional love truly looks like, expecting nothing in return. You demonstrated grace when faced with cruelty, dignity when faced with exclusion. I watched you maintain your integrity while our son, influenced by greed and his wife's manipulations, treated you abominably. I cannot undo the past, but I can attempt to create some justice in how I leave my affairs. You were my partner for 32 years, the mother of my child, and in the end, my most loyal friend. What I leave to you is not charity or even compensation, but recognition of your rightful place in my life and legacy. I hope you will use what I leave you to find joy and purpose in your remaining years. Perhaps travel to those places we always discussed but never visited. Support the educational causes you believe in so passionately. Know that you are loved, respected, and valued by me even when I fail to show it properly. With enduring affection and profound gratitude, Thomas. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, taking a moment to compose myself before nodding to Mr. Fitzgerald that he could continue. To Ruth Porter, Mr. Fitzgerald read clearly, I leave 60% of my remaining estate, approximately $27 million, with no restrictions or conditions. This includes my primary residence if she wishes to claim it, or it can be liquidated according to her preference. This bequest is in recognition of her 32 years as my wife, her role in building my business and raising our son, and her character and compassion during my final days. The room erupted in chaos. Jackson leapt to his feet, his face contorted with rage. 60%. This is insane. She divorced him. She walked away. She has no right to any of it. Amanda was practically screaming. She manipulated him when he was dying. This is elder abuse. We'll prove he wasn't competent. Mr. Fitzgerald raised his voice slightly, something I had never heard him do in all the years I had known him. If I may continue, please. There is more. The room reluctantly quieted, though Jackson remained standing, his hands balled into fists at his sides. The remaining 30% of the estate, Mr. Fitzgerald continued, approximately $13.5 million, is to be placed in a charitable foundation. The Ruth and Thomas Porter Foundation will focus on educational opportunities for underprivileged students and support for divorced women re-entering the workforce, causes that Ruth has championed throughout her life. Ruth will serve as the foundation's chairperson with full authority to appoint board members and direct its activities. Mr. Fitzgerald set down the will and removed his glasses. Thomas also instructed me to inform all parties that he underwent thorough psychiatric evaluation by 2 independent specialists before making these changes to his will. Both concluded he was of sound mind and under no undue influence. Their signed affidavits are included in the legal documentation, making any contest to this will extremely unlikely to succeed. He then reached below the table and produced a sealed box. Additionally, as mentioned in the video, this contains the evidence gathered by the private investigators. Jackson, this is for you to review privately. He slid the box toward my son, who made no move to touch it. Jackson's face had transformed into something I barely recognized, contorted with rage and betrayal. This is your fault, he hissed at me. You turned him against me, against us. You manipulated a dying man for his money. I shook my head sadly. Jackson, I had no idea about any of this. I never discussed inheritance with your father. I never expected or asked for anything. Liar! Amanda shrieked, her carefully maintained sophistication completely abandoned. You planned this all along. First the divorce to get sympathy, then swooping in during his illness. It was all calculated. Mr. Fitzgerald intervened, his voice firm but calm. I can personally attest that Ruth had no knowledge of Thomas's intentions. He was explicit about maintaining complete confidentiality regarding the changes to his will. Furthermore, I have known Thomas for over 30 years. He was not a man easily manipulated even during his illness. Jackson grabbed Amanda's arm roughly. We're leaving. Our lawyers will be in touch. He turned to me, his eyes cold. You won this round, Mom, but don't expect to ever see me again. You're dead to me now. The words cut through me like a physical pain. Despite everything, he was still my son, the baby I had carried, and nurtured the child I had raised with love and hope. Jackson, please, I started, but they were already storming toward the door. Jackson, Mr. Fitzgerald called, stopping my son momentarily. I strongly suggest you review the contents of that box before taking any legal action. The evidence regarding your wife's activities is quite comprehensive. Jackson hesitated for just a moment, looking back at the box, then continued out with Amanda, slamming the door behind them. The remaining attendees sat in uncomfortable silence. Robert Thomas's brother was the first to speak. Ruth, for what it's worth, Thomas and I talked about this. He was completely lucid and determined. He felt this was justice, not revenge. Patricia nodded in agreement. He worried about you, Ruth, more than you know. He wanted to make sure you would be secure and that your kindness would be recognized. Mr. Fitzgerald began gathering his papers. There will be considerable paperwork to handle in the coming weeks, Ruth. My office will assist you with everything. For now, take some time to process all of this. It's been quite overwhelming. As the room gradually emptied, I remained seated, staring at the envelope containing Thomas's letter. My life had just transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. The vindication felt hollow in the face of my son's complete rejection. All the money in the world couldn't fill the void of that loss. Mr. Fitzgerald returned after escorting the others out, sitting beside me at the now empty conference table. "Thomas asked me to tell you something privately," he said gently. In the months before his diagnosis, he had actually been considering approaching you about reconciliation. I looked up in surprise. "Reconciliation as in remarriage," Mr. Fitzgerald nodded. He had come to realize that his priorities had been misplaced throughout your marriage. The cancer diagnosis came before he found the courage to discuss it with you. He said it was his greatest regret. Fresh tears filled my eyes. "We wasted so much time." "He didn't see your friendship during his illness as wasted time," Mr. Fitzgerald replied. "He told me those were some of the most meaningful months of his life connecting with you, without the complications of marriage or expectations." I nodded, understanding. Thomas and I had found a different kind of closeness in those final months, a pure friendship built on shared history and mutual respect. "What will you do now?" Mr. Fitzgerald asked. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, then back up with newfound resolution. "First, I'm going to try to reach my son, though I suspect it will take time. Then I'm going to honor Thomas's wishes by using these resources wisely. The foundation will be his legacy as much as mine." As I left the building into the now clearing day, I felt both weighted and lightened, burdened by my son's rejection, but freed from years of unacknowledged pain. Thomas's final message had given me validation I hadn't realized I needed. Now I had to find the strength to move forward, hoping that someday Jackson would be ready to hear the truth. The weeks following the will reading unfolded in ways I never could have predicted. Initially, as threatened, Jackson filed a legal contest to the will, claiming I had exercised undue influence over Thomas during his illness. His attorneys demanded a formal investigation into the circumstances surrounding the will's modification. Mr. Fitzgerald calmly presented the extensive documentation Thomas had prepared: psychiatric evaluations, witness statements, video recordings of Thomas explaining his decisions while clearly lucid, and signed affidavits from his medical team confirming his mental competence. Additionally, the private investigator Thomas had hired provided sworn testimony about the surveillance he had conducted at Thomas's request. Most damning, however, was what Jackson discovered in the box of evidence Mr. Fitzgerald had provided. Though I never saw the contents myself, I learned from Mr. Fitzgerald that it contained photographs of Amanda with another man taken during Thomas's illness, text messages where she disparaged both Thomas and Jackson to friends, and recorded conversations where she explicitly discussed her plans to access Thomas's fortune after his death. 3 weeks after filing the contest, Jackson abruptly withdrew it. A week later, I received a curt email from a divorce attorney copying me on a notification that Jackson had filed for divorce from Amanda, citing irreparable breakdown of the marriage and irreconcilable differences. The timing made the real reason transparent. I made several attempts to reach out to Jackson during this period. I left voicemails expressing my concern for his well-being and offering support during what must be a difficult time. I sent emails assuring him that I had never intended to come between him and his father's estate, and would gladly share more of the inheritance if that would heal our relationship. All went unanswered. Then, about 6 weeks after the will reading, my doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. I opened it to find Jackson standing there looking haggard and years older than his 35 years. Without a word, I stepped aside to let him in. We sat in my living room in awkward silence before he finally spoke. "I watched all of it," he said, his voice rough. "The videos, the recordings, the text messages, everything Dad collected." I nodded, but remained silent, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "Amanda," he began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "She never loved me. 3 years of marriage, and it was all about Dad's money. She was. He couldn't finish the sentence. I'm so sorry, Jackson, I said softly. No one deserves that kind of betrayal. He looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time in years. How are you not angry with me after everything I said to you, everything I believed about you? How can you even let me in your house? The question pierced straight to my heart. You're my son, Jackson. Nothing will ever change that. I'm hurt, yes, deeply hurt by how you've treated me these past years, but I've never stopped loving you. His composure crumbled then, and for the first time since he was a small boy, my son cried in my arms. Between sobs, apologies spilled out for the cruel words, for believing Amanda's manipulation, for pushing me away. I held him, my own tears flowing freely, this moment of reconnection more precious than any inheritance could ever be. Our relationship didn't heal overnight. There were more conversations, some difficult and painful, as we began the slow process of rebuilding trust. Jackson admitted that he had been jealous of my relationship with Thomas after the divorce, feeling somehow that our continued friendship betrayed him. Amanda had skillfully nurtured and exploited that insecurity. Without telling Jackson, I instructed Mr. Fitzgerald to set up a separate trust fund for him outside the restrictions Thomas had placed on his inheritance. I allocated $5 million from my portion to be available to him unconditionally whenever he might need it, not because he deserved it more than Thomas had judged, but because I wanted him to know that my love had no conditions attached. As for the rest of the inheritance, I approached it with careful consideration. The family home where Thomas had continued to live after our divorce held too many complicated memories, so I decided to sell it. Instead, I purchased a comfortable but modest townhouse in a vibrant area of Boston, close to cultural attractions I had always enjoyed but rarely indulged in during my working years. I established the Ruth and Thomas Porter Foundation with the $13.5 million Thomas had designated, but I added another $10 million from my personal inheritance. The foundation focused on two main areas: educational scholarships for children from single-parent homes and support programs for divorced women over 50 re-entering the workforce, a demographic I understood intimately. Working with the foundation gave me purpose and direction. I assembled a board of experienced educators and social workers, people who shared my vision of practical support rather than just financial handouts. We created mentorship programs, skills training workshops, and emergency assistance funds for women going through difficult transitions. For myself, I finally took some of the trips Thomas and I had always talked about but perpetually postponed due to his work commitments. I walked the cobblestone streets of Prague, watched the sunrise over Machu Picchu, and stood in silent awe before the ancient stones of Petra. During these travels, I often found myself wishing I could share these moments with Thomas, imagining the conversations we might have had. The most unexpected development came 6 months after Thomas's death. Mr. Fitzgerald, who had been so helpful throughout the estate process, invited me to dinner. What I initially assumed was a business meeting to discuss foundation matters gradually revealed itself as something more personal. Jeffrey, as he asked me to call him, was a widower of 8 years. Over subsequent dinners, a warm friendship evolved with potential for more when we were both ready. Jackson's divorce from Amanda was finalized quickly, as she had signed a prenuptial agreement that left her with very little in case of divorce. She attempted to contest it, claiming emotional distress, but withdrew when Jackson's attorneys threatened to present the evidence Thomas had gathered. She moved to California shortly afterward, reportedly already involved with a tech executive she had met during her marriage to Jackson. The most meaningful change in the year following Thomas's death was the slow reconstruction of my relationship with Jackson. We began with weekly lunches, awkward at first, but gradually more comfortable. He started therapy, working through his complicated feelings about both his parents and his failed marriage. I saw glimpses of the thoughtful, sensitive boy I had raised emerging from beneath the entitled exterior Amanda had cultivated. For Christmas that year, rather than exchanging material gifts, Jackson and I volunteered together, serving meals at a homeless shelter. Watching him interact with genuine compassion toward people in need, I felt a pride that went beyond anything his financial success could have inspired. "Mom," he said as we drove home that evening, "I think I understand now what Dad was trying to teach me. All those years I thought success meant making money, having things. But that's not it at all, is it? What do you think it is?" I asked, curious about his perspective. He was quiet for a moment. "Connection. Being seen for who you really are, and valued anyway. That's what you always gave me, and what I threw away. That's what Dad realized too late with you." I reached across to squeeze his hand, words unnecessary between us. The journey hasn't been easy. There are still moments of tension, old patterns that threaten to resurface. Jackson has good days and difficult ones as he rebuilds his life and reevaluates his priorities. I have days when grief for Thomas hits unexpectedly, not just for his death, but for the years we lost to misaligned priorities. But there is healing too genuine and profound. Thomas's final gift wasn't really the money substantial, though it was. His true legacy was the truth he forced us all to confront, the opportunity for authentic connection he created through his careful planning. I often think about that will reading, sitting quietly while my son smirked, believing I would get nothing. The irony is that what I received was far more valuable than the millions that now sit in my accounts. I received validation, justice, and eventually my son back in my life. If Thomas could see us now, I think he would be satisfied with how his final act has unfolded, not because of how the money was distributed, but because of the healing it ultimately facilitated. What have I learned through all of this? That dignity cannot be bought or sold. That truth, however painful, is ultimately liberating. That forgiveness is not a single act, but a daily choice. And that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't measured in dollars at all, but in the connections we nurture and the lives we touch. As I sit here today, I wonder about your own family stories. Have you experienced similar conflicts over inheritance or family dynamics? What helped you heal from family estrangement? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life experiences that remind us we're never alone in our struggles. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find peace in your own family journey, whatever form it may take.